My name is Richard Duran. I am the Marketing and Communications Manager for the association. Thank you for coming to today's introduction to compensation and benefits benchmarking with Association Executive Director Casey Sclar. I'm going to pass it over to Casey shortly. Just a couple of notes. If you do have any questions during the presentation, please use the Q&A feature. There is a feature on your taskbar that will allow you to just add a question, and we will address them at the end of the presentation. And if you have any questions or problems logging in to the platform that we are about to discuss, you can always contact us at info@publicgardens.org. And with that, I am going to hand this over to Casey. Go ahead, sir.
All right, thank you very much, Richard, and welcome back to some of you, and welcome to many others of you. We're going to talk about the compensation and benefits benchmarking that the American Public Gardens Association has in the platform. We're going to spend some time demystifying some of the different things surrounding the platform and what it does and what it uses and how to use it. Some of those I covered in the last hour in gardens benchmarking. I'm going to do a very annotated portion of that for compensation and benefits before diving right into the different aspects of the comp and benefits platform package. I'll probably go about a half hour or so and then field the questions that many of you have about how to use the platform, how to use different advanced features of the platform. So with that, I'm going to launch in. As Richard mentioned, we're going to have all of you muted for this first part of it so that there's no technical difficulties or interruptions, but then there will be time where we'll unmute you later. And so if you have questions orally, that way you can, but we would encourage you to use our chat feature, which is located on the lower ribbon of the webinar panel. And you can just hit that and ask a question to everybody, let everybody know what's on your mind. And Richard and I will field those and answer those as we go through. So if there's anything that's unclear, we'd be happy to answer that. Today we'll focus on compensation and benefits. Again, best way to find all our benchmarking tools and resources. We always encourage you to log in first and then go to resources and tools benchmarking. It takes you to this particular page. From here, clicking either here or here will link you to the compensation and benefits benchmarking platform, or give you more information and different things. Today, we'll focus on enter data. All of these typically will get you into the platform in one way or the other. So both enter data and get results kind of leads you to mainly the same place. So we'll just click enter data today, which will bring me over to a splash screen, if you will. 99% of individuals blow past the screen and close it without reading it. I'm going to switch over to our test case garden, Franklin Botanical Garden, located in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and impersonate Ben Franklin for the rest of the program today. With this, we can easily see what we have access to for both and where we need to enter data. If we've been granted access to compensation and benefits, it will show up on this side. For those of you who click through and only see gardens benchmarking, you will need to contact us at info@publicgardens.org. More specifically, if you're not the president, executive director, CEO of your institution, we will need that garden leader to email us specifically from their account, specifically giving you access and authorizing that you have access to compensation and benefits, and then we can turn that on. We do that for security and confidentiality purposes so that only the people that are designated by the garden leader can access compensation and benefits information, because it does include salary information for our for that organization and that institution. We know that that's information that we may or may not want. It's the choice of the institution to be disclosing that information to all its employees. We do not have any cases currently where a garden has granted that compensation and benefits access beyond, say, 2 or 3 people. So with that, if we click into compensation and benefits, we have a whole bunch of different pieces of information and data that Ben Franklin can get a hold of for Franklin Botanical Garden. We even have trend data and trend history data that shows the progress and different things that have been put in for that organization and for that institution. A powerful feature can be the download feature so that we can figure out where we can get the questions. That's available for the gardens benchmarking and for the compensation and benefits platform. So if we need to go out to different areas or different sites for garden staff, if we need to know, say, what the latest hourly descriptions are, and position descriptions and seasonal positions and what we're using for in our garden, and we'll show that later, simply downloading those questions will help. The second most frequent question that we typically get is, what fiscal year do I use? Do I use a different fiscal year for compensation data than for, say, for my other gardens data? We encourage you to be consistent year to year to year. We encourage you to always, if you're entering in for the first time, to go back as many fiscal years as you can and work up to your most recently closed fiscal year, and compensation and benefits is no different. And that's because there is a copy prior year data feature available that makes it very easy for you for values that don't change. And we see that oftentimes with, say, benefits programs would be a good example of how that information doesn't change. So for example, if I go back to 2015 and 2016 and I want to put in a question about my, my benefits overview as a particular garden, and I want to look at what benefits packages I offer childcare, I offer an employee discount in the gift shop, I offer different exhibits, I offer group health, different ability, and a paid time off program, and a mobile device discount, and I only offer that to full-time employees. If I click save, it records that value for 2015 and 2016. If I switch and I go to 2016 and 2017, now all I need to do is click that copy prior year data feature, and it will let me know my different answers. And the large checkbox was one answer with different sub-answers that I've given. I click save, and it's immediately imported all that information, and then I can just keep rolling that forward year to year to year to year to year. So that copy prior year data feature is really valuable for things like benefits that may not change all that much time over time over time. So for example, in group insurance, if I'm back in 2015 and 2016, and I want to check the most offered but least enjoyed benefit, the dental plan, but let's say we have a medical POS, a medical HMO, and a medical PPO. We offer all of those, but we only offer it for our employees. And the percent of premium paid for garden employee coverage, we'll make that 50%. And the family dependent coverage, we'll make that 50%. And if there's a group life package offered. So it was that fast to save that in one fiscal year. We went through our open enrollment period and it didn't change. Going to 2015, from 2015 or 2016 to 2016 and 2017. Again, these values are not blank when I move forward. Simple copy prior year data, confirm that it's copying those answers, and all those answers are there and ready to go. I am going to focus a little bit today in that benefit area, because it's an area that oftentimes is the most useful to our human resources professionals. But I find that when I introduce it, it's often an area that many of our folks, our operations folks and our finance folks, didn't really spend a lot of time looking at what's in this area and how valuable it can be. So for example, retirement benefits, here's the retirement benefit plan. So say Franklin Botanical Gardens has a 403B and they're offering a very generous 5% employer match. When we go in to compare that feature, that can be really valuable in terms of benefit programs, what it is we have, and even filtering that by a region can be very useful. So we can see here in blue are the ones that have been checked for Franklin Botanical Gardens. Here in black are the only ones that's offered. Hopefully Ben forgot to check professional development and training, because he should have sent his staff to a webinar on benchmarking with the American Public Gardens Association so that they could learn more. Sorry, bad joke, but you get what I'm talking about here, and different packages and different programs and what's offered to whom. And all of that can be used in a presentation to Franklin Botanical Gardens employees to be comparing what Franklin Botanical Garden is doing in the way of benefits in accordance with all their different peer organizations. That's a really great thing that a lot of our gardens want to do, is show as a collective of gardens how much we're all offering to our employees. So that's a very valuable piece. And then we also even go into sort of some aspects of what we would call paid time off, and how much paid time off is offered and where that is in terms of the 25th, median, and 75th percentile. We use a pooled PTO to encompass both a sick bank or a personal leave. We know that these vary by state, and so what we've tried to do is create something that shows what different organizations are using so that's applicable to any state. And then I do also want to point out that we have and will in the future ask some very basic diversity and inclusion questions of the organization. We realize that not every organization discloses their individual diversity demographics, and we're very respectful of that. But I think there's some wonderful things to be found in here on where your organization should be in terms of best practice as an organization, whether or not you have a formal written diversity and inclusion policy, where the organizational leadership in your organization is standing on principles of diversity and inclusion. It was something that was highlighted for horticultural organizations as being very deficient in. So best practice is to have agreed upon principles that come from your board or your leadership down, and then certainly to train in that. And so this is all part of what our IDEA committee is looking at and tracking, and all that can be found here. Moving back to a quick basic, and then moving one or two quick basics, and then moving forward, I'll remind all of you that for any of these, not only can you use the download feature, but you can also use different save as features. When you're in the comparison area, you can save these values in a spreadsheet to be able to create your own graphs and track your own graphs for different things. In compensation and benefits, the reports tableau is deliberately more limited. What you can do is you can download a garden's benefit report, and you can download an Excel spreadsheet that reports Collie adjusted compensation data. We've sort of deliberately limited this as an additional layer of security, because we realized that just hitting print on that and having that piece of paper, that's a very extraordinarily valuable piece of paper. And we want to make sure that that's only accessed when the person accessing it deliberately wants to access it. So we instead really rely and ask you to rely more on what's contained in the different salary platforms. And with that, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the salary platform, how it works. There's a couple of things with it that we feel are great advantages of it that we want you to use, and tools that we want you to use. So first, we're going to go to the Our Garden tab. We're going to use it for executive and senior positions. These are called matrixed answers. So the first area is, let's say that Franklin Botanical Garden now knows that in 2015 to 2016, it actually hired a chief financial officer. We'd add that. And then in the next field, we'd go to the drop down and we know that now we need to add the chief financial officer data into that field. And in that year, we chose, say, to pay that person $100,000. We enter that in. There's no bonus compensation for that individual. No other taxable compensation except for, say, a pair of work boots so that when they go out in the garden, they don't hurt themselves. And then it will automatically, upon clicking save, tabulate the total annual compensation for that individual to be $1,090. And then from there, we move over into a Collie adjusted salary data. And we can look at that person's cost of living indexed salary data. And I'll go back to that more in the comparison feature as to how we actually use that and why we actually use that. And so that's how the data entry goes for that. Data entry is very similar with a few exceptions for the position for garden staff. So we always start with any of these job descriptions will work the same that we have on our staff. We can look at some different pieces. What we do is we group them by different job function. So for example, this is grouped by, I'm just going to blow that up so that we're looking at some of the fine print here, into the AD group, the CS group, the DM group, the EP group, the FA group, the HT group, the MC group, or the VS group for all those different areas. But we've also created a downloadable list of comparable titles because we know that when we ran through the database, we had 800 different job titles. So if you were looking to figure out where aquatic ecologist / IT specialist would go, we can tell you that we looked at where we would put that portion or that job function, and all you have to do is click there to download that, and you can see where we kind of guide you to make sure that you've lumped those together. So we'll just look at what's currently in the comparison feature in just a minute, and then we'll also look at how we're handling that cost of living index adjusted information. So let's look at some garden staff positions in comparison. We're going to view the selected year, but we can also view year-over-year comparisons. So that can be very useful in looking at salary data and saying by overall for our staff or overall for different job classifications and comparisons, how has that worked for our garden versus other gardens in a year-over-year capacity. So that's a really valuable feature to be able to use for multi-year comparisons for salary. We'll stick to the selected year for this, look at some staff compensation and some different pieces. So for bookkeeper, for example, or for any of the ones that we have, that we've checked that we want to have answers for. So in this case, I think we have on our staff, I think we have an education associate vice president. I'll have to go back and look at which boxes that we checked in that spot. So we have an education manager position. So we'll go back in staff compensation and look at that education manager. And that's just sort of a way of, that's going to give you a little bit of a glimpse into some of the preview about how to use these data to your best advantage, which is a little bit later on in our call today. But here you can see that looking at Franklin Botanical Garden in an unfiltered capacity, The annual base salary for that person is listed at $40,000. They're matching about the 25th percentile for all gardens in that area. There's about 44 responses to that particular thing, meaning there's about 44 different job listings that return with education program manager or education manager throughout our gardens. And in this case, not enough data to determine whether or not that person was eligible for a bonus, because that question wasn't asked until 2016 to 2017. And if there was annual bonus compensation, you can see. So in the 25th percentile, there were, that would be none. And the median is 0, not a lot of annual compensation for the poor education manager, but there are some gardens are offering some bonus compensation. And then looking at, and what we do is we realize that some gardens don't have a full-time equivalent range. So for the staff positions, not for the executive positions, we're returning an hourly rate for that. So the data can be input into a couple of different ways so that you can track the approximate hourly rate on a 40-hour work week, which is where the majority of states are on a 40-hour work week. But back in our garden, for example, in the data entry area, we've created for you several different tools from that position description, but also in looking at hourly wage data, we have some tips and tricks and tools to be able to use in entering these data that will help you in determining how to apply it. So we have tools to enter in cost of living index data for the organization. So for example, I happen to know that in Philadelphia in 2015, 2016, it happened to be 108% of normal. And then here is where you'll be getting the most current cost of living index data for your garden. All right. So with that, that allows us to see for some areas where we have data for those individuals, what their approximate salaries would be and when they were there on a cost-adjusted value. Now, Franklin doesn't happen to have these particular positions that are here. They do have them for some of the education professionals. They've entered in some data differently in each tab, so it was 110% is what Ben put in based on data that he had received. And you can see how these are returned for that hypothetical education assistant coordinator or that education manager. And then based on that cost of living index adjustment, how much the real purchasing value, if you will, of that when it undergoes 110% cost of living index adjustment, the actual relative take-home pay for that $40,000 becomes less. And on behalf of the very, gainfully employed education managers in this world, you can see how that can be a very significant point where, that purchasing power is diminished. So the obvious question that comes up that a lot of people want to know or want to use the answer to, well, is, so what do I want to pay that professional? How would I figure out how much I should be paying that person? And so in order to do that, we've come up with a tool that's a very useful tool that's available in the comparison feature to look at how we would do that. And so the best area for it that we use it in is that executive and senior position. We've denoted who that is. We've looked at their compensation packages with taxable and non-taxable bonus information. And now we're saying, okay, so we're looking at that finance officer and saying, okay, so what really should we be paying that person? Because, our finance officer maybe is someone who is just starting out in the field or is very advanced in their field. So this Collie index adjustment tool is an extremely useful tool. I'll open it up for you as an attachment here in just a minute, and you'll see how that tool works. And it may be something that hasn't been typically downloaded or utilized by all of you, but it's an extremely useful tool in terms of equity and in coming up with different compensation adjustments that you might need to make. And the tool itself is very easy to use. And there's even an example in it for CFO that I can show you. So it spotlights what your garden's value is. It's not paying as much attention necessarily to just the median information, because we know that when we filter it, it can change. And then once filtered, you can see the median information, for example, in that. But if you want to adjust it to 75%, you can. So you enter in the job title, you enter in the median base salary, the blue box that you obtained after your filtering characteristics. You enter in your cost of living index adjustment factor. So in the case of that CFO, it would be 110%. You enter in your current value for that position, and then your new target salary would come. If you wanted to move up to 75% of normal, you would just use that 75th percentile value instead of that, that median value. And so then, not only is the new target salary calculated, but your deviation is also calculated so that you can see, okay, this is how much I need to raise that person, so that you can determine how quickly or how long you want to take to move that person along in that salary trajectory. So it's a really good and useful tool that you can only download from that spot. Okay, getting back to our platform, want to encourage you all to use different filterable characteristics and how we employ those, and also different peer clusters. So for example, Ben is interested in hiring, say, we have a new position and it's a chief operating officer position. So Ben wants to look at what their peers are paying chief operating officers. So again, the platform has several different ones that they have at their disposal. And so I'll use one that's for the Philadelphia region, and it'll return data based on whatever salary characteristic we want, whatever position we have for that. You can create a new one, and so we'll call this one Gene, for example. And again, to create a peer cluster, any of the organizations that have accessed the platform, so that you're not just sure whether or not it's entering data or not, will be listed here. So it's always good to enter in as many institutions as you have. And this is again done for purposes of confidentiality and for blindness. You cannot access another garden's values from any of our platforms. All you can see is the data for your own organization and your own institution. In the case of gardens benchmarking, all of the garden employees can access the information that's in gardens benchmarking, but there's no salary information in gardens benchmarking. Here in compensation and benefits, you have to be specifically authorized to be able to gain access to compensation and benefits. You can see those results for your garden. You can compare to a suite of peers, but you will never know which peer is forming that entire cluster. So we just want to say, maybe we'll go and look at, and Ben wants to compare all of the organizations that begin with the letter C. So we'll add several different organizations, and I've got 19 entries in that peer cluster. And now there'll be a setting that's done, that's created those filters. And we may not have cost of living index data for them, but we'll be able to figure out some compensation adjustment platforms and some other things for data based on those estimates. So that's how we can use a lot of this information to be able to generate some results for us on different salaries and different salary adjustment pieces. So let's walk through a real quick example of how we might do this, say for an executive director. We might be interested in any garden that, say, was a public-private partnership that year. We'll go back to seeing how that generated a subset of accounts and how that moved the data differently for that executive director role, and where we found their annual compensation being adjusted. And that same piece is going to carry over to that Collie adjusted salary data for that given year. So for that given year, the cost of living index adjusted value that was noted was slightly higher than the median value. And then that skewed that executive director's annual base salary as well as their total compensation. So I feel like what I've done is give you a pretty holistic and maybe rather fast overview of what the different aspects of compensation and benefits benchmarking can do. What I can kind of keep rolling, but what I'd really prefer is that you all who are assembled here ask me some questions and let's work together and see how the platform works and what pieces of information can be extracted from that. So Richard is going to go through and unmute a lot of you now. You should check to make sure that your own phone isn't muted. But let's have some questions about different things that the platform can do so that I can demonstrate those to you. And I do know some of you by name, and so you will be the ones that I might pick on first, but I do encourage you all to be able to ask questions, please.
So everyone is unmuted. They will need to decide to unmute themselves with their own settings, but they have the ability to talk.
All are so quiet today. So, oftentimes I find that when I do this demonstration and it's quiet afterward, my tendency is to say to myself, okay, what didn't I cover, or why are people being so quiet? And then I realize that a lot of it is I give you a lot of information and you're just trying to kind of let it sink in. So I'm just going to take a pause for a minute. I'm going to go back to some really basics, and I'm just going to allow you to just kind of sit and synthesize while I talk and think about some different questions or some things that you want to know. How does the platform do this before I get into a quick demonstrative example? So a lot of the things that we talked about are located in some very helpful videos on our website where you can easily go back, you can talk to your leadership of your garden about why the different platforms are used or necessary. We have a whole bunch of how-to do this. So if you got a little bit behind and you said, oh, Casey's clicking very fast, I don't know how to do this or that, we have a lot of these helpful YouTube videos that you can go back and you can use. And then here, you can always go back to the welcome message screen, and you can say, okay, so I'm logged in as Franklin Botanical Garden. What do I still need to do? There'll be specific status for you that's there. It may say you still need to enter data for 2018-2019. It may say you haven't entered any data for 2015 to 2016. And it has some good links both to the user's guide, which is extremely useful, and to the support page. And so when we're there, that support page is an absolutely amazing tool. It has the quick start data entry guide for both gardens benchmarking and for compensation and benefits. It has some useful tools so that if you're, for example, working, say, with a college or university, and they're doing a survey for you, and you reference our study as a result of how you were doing something, that's where we see we use these sort of access language points, and then the survey questions, the Our Garden tab, the copy prior year feature, and all these different features that are there that we have. So so with that, what I'm going to say is, in shifting over just for a second to reports and charts and looking at some of these features, having the ability, especially in some of these salary benefits, to look at year-over-year comparisons can be extremely valuable for looking at salaried positions and their estimates year over year over year.
Casey, we do have a question. I don't know if you saw in the question and answers, but can you go over how to select a peer group one more time?
Yeah, I absolutely can, Richard. I'm happy to do that. The year-over-year feature was instituted, before I do that, the year-over-year feature was instituted relatively recently, and so that's why when I pull this up, we're not seeing a lot of data come from it. But you can see that as I've come up here and I've come to a more recent fiscal year, you can see the general trend in increases over periods of time. And so what those percent increases have been, for example, over those year-over-year periods of time. So that's an extremely useful feature. Let's go back to a selected year, and I'll show you a great example of how to do that. And Penny asked a really good question, unless she was trying to be private, and I apologize, Penny, if you're being anonymous. I'm going to riff off this and say, let's look at, the garden is going through some organizational restructuring, and it's trying to look at what we want to add, say, a different senior leader. So in going through and doing that, picking out a peer cluster can be really, really useful for that. So the peer cluster feature is located down here.
I'm just
there
listening. What's that?
can be preloaded features. So some of these are ones that I've created in the past, or as you click for new, that's where you can create a new peer cluster. So let's give this one a name. How about we'll call this Hal. And let's have some of you that are unmuted just suggest how do we want to add things to Hal. Just give me an example of how I might want to do it. I mean, we can pick through different gardens that we know that are in different regions of the country that we believe are similar to us and that we want to look at. Let's say, for example, that I just want to do historic gardens that have some aspect of history with them. So I'll add that one. The American Heart Society, property is historic, Annapolis, the Mott Estate. I suppose you could consider Arnold historic, as it was probably one of the first arboretums. We'll extend that to the History Center, although that's a different structure, Bard, and I'm just going through and looking at some of these that I know are historic or have historic value to them. And I'm creating more of a history feature. And I'm just through the B's and I'm not moving as fast as I probably need to. And you can easily remove them. So for example, I add coastal Maine, but then if I want to go back and say, wait a minute, coastal Maine isn't a historic property, what the heck? I'm just going to take it out just like that. So it's easy to go in and alter those peer clusters, right? You know, if I find that I have some that I want to add, I can come back and I can edit that if I want to. So just for the purposes of this, we'll have to, we'll look at that. We've come up with a response of 29 responses, pooled values, and again, that's changed. It's changed the cost of living index indicator for that and changed the position of that CEO accordingly with its other peers. So it can be really valuable because it will also pull from that pooled select data and will adjust the 25th, median, and 75th percentiles appropriately. So if the garden, if Franklin Botanical Garden was interested in looking at a new chief operating officer but doesn't have one, therefore there's no blue value, these are still adjusted appropriately, so that can easily be dropped into a PDF or a PowerPoint slide, knowing that we had employed that peer cluster feature, and can be downloaded and used, say, for a board meeting or for a meeting of staff leadership to plan for this position. So often gardens might do this, say, with a position that's going to be expected to return a certain amount of earned revenue over time. Maybe the garden wants to hire a special events person. Okay. All right. Oftentimes when I do this, probably one of the more examples that I tend to have to walk through has to do with cost of living index adjustments and how I apply them and why they're meaningful, and adjusting salaries that way. And we've gone through that once today, but I'm happy to go through it with a more living experience if you want to, because you know, the way that we created this, we realized that, you know, our gardens are located throughout the country. The job functions of many of them are similar, but it can be hard to shop for a COO of a garden in a region. There may not be that many people who are in that position, say for an organization that has a different size operating budget. And this tool allows you to do that. Okay, so we've demonstrated compensation and benefits benchmarking for you. We've gone through the different benefits and other things. Are there any other questions that you all have for this. And hopefully you found this time valuable if you don't have any. Well, all right. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Richard. And Richard, if you want to wrap up for us, let us know. We've recorded this session, so it's going to be potentially available later for those of us who couldn't join today, or if you want to join back and look at how we did something. So thank you very much for your time today.